guys. Okay, thank you so much for joining. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from on this beautiful Thursday. I see some of you are in my area. I'm here in Southern California as well. My name is Megan Brown, and I'm a training and technical assistant specialist with ICF. And I've had the pleasure of being a part of the CYAI project through development of a white paper titled Closing the Gap, Tips to Engage Tribal Youth in Registered Apprenticeship Programs, which has helped inform this presentation today. And you'll be able to find this resource on the CYAI2024.org website, and we'll link that for you as well in our presentation. So I'm grateful for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you get something pertinent out of our conversation today. Just a quick agenda overview. We're going to go through a couple of acknowledgements, some disclaimers. We're going to recognize Native American Heritage Month, which is November. We're going to go through a quick little poll, have an introduction, and then we'll get into the strategies that we're here to learn today to engage tribal youth. And we'll close it with a video, again, honoring Native American Heritage Month, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end if you have any questions. As Lindsay said, if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat or use the Q&A feature, and we'll get to those as well. So first and foremost, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of a given geographic area and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their ancestral territories. So please, if you could put in the chat if you know the names of the tribes that represent the land that you are on right now. I'd love to see if you are familiar or are aware. Awesome. So honoring the land is a best practice overall, but especially when addressing a tribal community as we sit on tribal land wherever we are in the United States. As I mentioned, I'm speaking to you from Southern California. I'm here in San Bernardino County. And if you're not familiar, San Bernardino County is the largest county in the nation, spanning over 20,000 square miles. It's actually been the home to tribal peoples since time began. And at one point, there were millions of Indigenous people here in the state of California. So this land acknowledgement was borrowed from the California State University San Bernardino Office of Tribal Relations. So I would like to acknowledge the land of the Gabrielino people, the Tongva peoples, Chemehuevi, the Nuwu peoples, Serrano, Ma'arayam peoples, and the federally recognized land of the Yahavi Atam of San Manuel Nation here in San Bernardino. I'd also like to make a couple of disclaimers at this time. So first, and most importantly to me, is that I'm not of Native American descent. My family's been in California for over 7 generations, so I was actually shocked to find out that I didn't have any Native blood, but alas, I do not. That being said, though, I have worked in the tribal community for almost 14 years here in Southern California. I'm extremely passionate and protective of the community, and I'm super grateful for the lived experience that I have of working with tribal people for so many years. So this webinar, as I mentioned before, is informed by a white paper that comes from the perspective, as I mentioned, of lived experience in the community, in addition to interviews that I conducted with community members. Lastly, just a reminder, these are general strategies to engage tribal youth. I'm not speaking for them at all. The intention here is that these strategies open the door for larger opportunities for tribal youth and RAPs. So moving forward, I just want to make sure we go through those disclaimers. I'm by no means speaking for the community, just on behalf. So as many of you know, November is Native American Heritage Month. So seeing as though it's the last day of the month, I feel it's our duty to pay tribute in a small way. So here's a short video about Native American Heritage Month from youth.
Every day, Native American people are breaking negative stereotypes as they continue to form their own positive narratives while also honoring the past and ancestors from before us.
Oftentimes, you don't see Native American representation in the mainstream media. So I think it is important to give this minority group more attention.
But I believe we should be recognized every day. So many people think of us in a historical content, but we are still here.
My name is Leihalia Salam, and I'm an enrolled member of the Yakama Nation.
Zayita Bai, Ninani Hakobi White, Ne Bene Sasoni.
Ipivishiv, Raven Morgan Nahisive.
I'm Ashley. I'm Inupiaq, Inuk.
Native American Heritage Month is important to me because I am proud of my culture and who I am. What about you?
Well, I don't think it's enough though. I want to see more representation of Native Americans, such as artists, creators, and scholars. How do you feel about this?
I am thankful the month of November is a time to recognize Native Americans, but it should not only just be during Native American Heritage Month where Native people are recognized. It should be every single day. What about you?
We're not people of the past, we're not people that are ancient. So it's important to start seeing Native people as present day people.
I love the emphasis there at the end on recognizing that Native Americans are not ancient people, but people of today. I think this is so well said and should be a regular reminder for programs aiming to work with tribal youth in the tribal community. It sounds really simple when the work that we do is so targeted at expanding equity, but I've had many conversations with individuals saying things like Native Americans still exist. So there is so much work to actually be done. So throughout this presentation, I will be referring to Native American youth as tribal youth, and we are going to touch on how to refer to an individual respectfully in a bit. But at this time, I'd like to take a quick poll to see where our class stands on some knowledge today. So Lindsay's going to help me out with the poll here.
I have a question.
So question 1, how many federally recognized American Indian and Native American tribes are there in the United States? Give just a couple minutes here.
Getting some great answers in. You can actually see all 4 questions at once right now, so, or at least it will let you see them without me having to show them to you. So you can go ahead and answer all 4 of our poll questions right now. Which Megan shared number 1. Number 2 is approximately how many non-federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes are there? Number 3, what's the high school dropout rate for American Indian and Alaska Native youth compared to other races? And number 4, what % of the cybersecurity workforce is American Indian and Alaska Native?
Thank you so much. All right. Okay. So let's see where we stand. How many federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes are there in the United States? 33% said 832, 20% 574, another 33% over 1,000, and then a couple said 389. So as of right now, today it stands that there are 574 federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes. Approximately how many non-federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes are there? 20% guessed 150, 27% 700, 40% 300, and 13% 400. So this one is kind of a trick. It's not, there isn't a specific number. That's why it's an approximate. So anywhere between 200 and 400. So you guys were close on that one. And these were, again, not non-federally recognized tribes. What's the high school dropout rate for youth compared to other races? It's actually 4 times as much as the high school dropout rate. And then what percent of the cybersecurity workforce is American Indian, Alaska Native? And this is overall, not just youth. And it's about 1%. So there is a gap, and there's work to be done. So let's get into it. Thank you so much for participating there. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but let's begin with what is a registered apprenticeship program. These programs are industry-driven, high-quality career pathways that not only allow employers to build a future-focused workforce, but actually provide high-paying, high-quality job opportunities for the individual. It's an opportunity for employers in a variety of fields like cybersecurity and IT to build a strong pipeline of skilled workers and grow their business. At the same time, providing these customized on-the-job training programs for individuals in that specific field. All of this with the aim of helping individuals grow in an actual career pathway rather than just getting a job. So listen, we know the traditional education system and career pathway is not for everyone. Now, we all know someone who wasn't cut out for traditional learning systems. That might even be one of us here on the presentation today, and that's totally okay. So as we just learned, the high school dropout rate for tribal youth is 4 times the rate of other races. So clearly something is not working, and that's why these programs are so amazing. This is why the expansion of non-traditional career pathways for these youth, like CYAI, is an awesome opportunity for tribal youth to build a future. But first, in order to mitigate this underrepresentation, it requires us to acknowledge that they've been missed. You'll see here on the slide that from 2010 to 2019, the tribal representation in apprenticeships dropped by 46.3%. Now, this is an overall tribal representation. This is not just youth. It was not specified by age. But the data collected that determined this change actually was not clear on why the number had dropped so significantly. But one potential possibility is just a sheer lack of knowledge that RAPs even exist. And that came out in some of the conversations I had when interviewing individuals for the white paper. They didn't even know that RAPs was an option. So in addition, there's a lot of cultural insensitivity and a misunderstanding of how much historical trauma actually continues to affect the community today, in particular youth. So CYAI is, and first of all, it's a tough acronym for me to say, so I apologize if I'm slurring that. The Cybersecurity Youth Apprenticeship Initiative, CYAI, is an awesome opportunity for tribal youth to gain skills in the cybersecurity and IT field that could actually sustain a really good life. This field is among the fastest growing career fields nationally. It's literally everywhere. And CYAI had a goal of creating at least 900 new cybersecurity youth apprenticeships by the year 2024. And we actually have surpassed that and have already reached over 1,000 apprenticeships, which is so awesome and really exciting. However, we still need to increase the effort to reach the tribal youth more actively. So how do we do that? We work to build a bridge between RAPs and tribal youth, that the youth that are seeking sustainable careers, and they may not even know that that's what they're seeking. So the 3 general strategies that we're going to go over today, first is to recruit patiently. I'm going to sound like a broken record here when it comes to recruiting patiently, when it comes to time and consistency. And then we want to engage respectfully once we've recruited, and then continue to provide ongoing support throughout the entire program. So recruiting patiently, as I mentioned, you're going to hear me repeat throughout this presentation that time and consistency are key to recruiting and engaging with tribal youth. These youth are often very wary and cautious, and rightfully so. So this really requires programs to be patient and really consistent in their efforts. So recruitment efforts for tribal youth really need to first and foremost recognize tribal diversity among the community. So cultural customs, language, food is often different amongst tribes. Spiritual belief systems might range from traditional to Christian, and how someone identifies is based on preference. Someone might live on a reservation or a rancheria. Tribal communities are often governed by a tribal council, or they might be governed by a general committee. So although there are a lot of commonalities across tribes, they're ultimately each sovereign nation is distinct from the next. So you might hear tribal youth be referred to as Native American, Indigenous. This is where it's best to not assume, but just ask. And if you don't know, it's better to mirror what they say, or just clarify, how do they prefer to be identified. So a quote from one of my interviewees for the paper as a tribal TANF administrator who works really closely with youth. And he said, understanding that every tribal community, even neighbors, are very different. Every tribe is not the same. I have even learned this between villages, approaching and knowing that there are differences. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We are all still learning ourselves. Everyone doesn't know everything. There are no bad or wrong questions. So it's really imperative for programs to recognize the diversity within the community and learn together with the community. So building bridges between RAPs and tribal youth we want to help build this bridge through finding tribal liaisons that can actually introduce you to the youth and teach you about cultural sensitivity specific to that community. So, and partnering with community-based organizations is one great way of working with tribal youth. A lot of these programs already have youth coming to their program. And then tailoring your recruitment strategies specific to tribal youth by featuring them in some of the materials that are used as well. So time and consistency are key. Historical trauma is very much alive and real in the community, and it causes distrust and skepticism at times. Tribal youth really value consistency. I've seen this myself through years of working in the community. At one point, I taught teen pregnancy prevention in Native schools. And as a non-Native person, it took me a long time to actually build rapport and build trust. But showing up regularly, being authentic and being my genuine self, over time, I built deep rapport with the youth, and we were able to really make a difference in the schools. But this does take time, as I mentioned, and sometimes we don't have it, or it doesn't feel like we have it. So that consistency is something that will kind of help bridge the gap with time. And like I mentioned, being very genuine and authentic. Youth in particular, for those of you who have worked with youth, they can read right through it, right? So being true to who you are, being true to what the program is, and that what the value is that you're trying to bring to the individual is really important. Show up to community events. If you know there's a community fair, if you have spent enough time in the community, you know a few people, they invite you to a birthday party at the park. Showing up to community events also shows that that commitment. Providing lunch. I know tribal youth love hot Cheetos. It's always a hit. Show up with some hot Cheetos and you're in. And as I mentioned, in terms of being genuine and authentic, be really transparent with what the value is of the program to the community and the individual. Far too often tribes are tribes and tribal people are left out of the decision-making process for how to use the information that they are sharing with us. And this leads to a lot of hesitance and protectiveness of the community. So being aware of how the information is used that you're collecting, because it may not seem like you're actually collecting information because you're showing up saying, hey, I have this amazing program, I can help you. But even in building relationships, learning about their families, learning about their culture and tradition, that's taking information. So being really transparent about how that information will be used is going to help build that rapport. So one of the easiest ways to build this rapport is to just simply ask questions. Learn from each other. You know, a tribal youth living on a reservation may not know a whole lot about someone of a different race or a different religion who's lived off the reservation. And that's not across the board by any means. It's not a generalization, but just something to consider, you know, taking the time to learn from one another. It's much better to ask than potentially create a missed opportunity here. And I think sometimes we get nervous to admit our gaps in knowledge or a misunderstanding of something. So this goes a long way in just asking questions. So there's some subtle but significant distinctions between rural and urban tribal youth and how to engage with them. And just to be very clear, as with most information, this is not a one-size-fits-all strategies to recruiting and engaging with tribal youth by any means. These are just some basic distinctions. For the sake of the conversation, we're referring to rural as on reservation and urban as off reservation, but this may vary by community. So often the youth living on reservation might have a little bit more hesitance to outsiders, but I think this is important to keep in mind that this doesn't mean they should be missed. I think, again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we can, if we don't ask questions or we hesitate too much, we're missing an opportunity potentially. So some of the rural youth might have stronger connections to their culture and traditions, and they might actually need different resources than their urban counterparts. Maybe they, you know, transportation is an issue for most youth across the board, but a lot of youth living on reservations have internet access issues. So if they're having to do courses online or something, that could be a struggle for them in completing a program. And then urban off-reservation youth, oftentimes, again, not always, have been exposed to a bit more diversity, and they might be a little bit more willing to participate in new activities, just having a little less hesitance. And there's a possibility that they're not connected to their culture. So going in with an assumption that just because someone identifies tribal or native or indigenous, that they know about their culture and traditions is something to be aware of as well. It's really important to be prepared when you're recruiting with tribal youth. Be prepared to answer questions. So knowing in advance the type of information that they might be seeking is going to be really imperative to this relationship building. You know, things like, what is a RAP? What is cybersecurity? I've never even heard of it. Like, what kinds of jobs fit in there? How much is it going to cost me? Do I have to test to qualify? What if I don't have a computer? So just here for a second, we'd like you to imagine that you are engaging with a tribal youth. What are some questions outside of what we shared here that you think might come up for someone who you're trying to recruit into a RAPS program? So Lindsay's going to put in the chat a link to the Mentimeter. We'll give you a couple minutes here to throw up some potential questions you think that tribal youth might have about RAPS. Why should I trust you? Great one. Is this a free program? How much does it cost? Is there daycare while I'm at classes? Where would I work and how would I get there? There are no companies in my town. So where am I going to be able to do this apprenticeship? Great questions. Give you a couple more seconds here. Throw up anything else that comes to mind. Will I get paid? Yes. Do I have to be 18? Do I have to leave high school? Great. What support is available for me? I don't have a car. Is there a job at the end? Yes. Great. Do you provide transportation? Do I have to be there in person? Awesome. Yeah, exactly. So these are great questions. What if I haven't graduated high school? That's a big one, right? We talked about the dropout rate. Can I do this program around a job that I might already have now? Perfect. Yeah, so being prepared in advance to answer some of these questions is going to set you apart and be able to be ahead of the game when addressing tribal youth that have concerns and hesitance, and maybe they don't understand what the program is at all. Thank you so much. So where should I recruit? So knowing your audience and where to locate them is going to help with recruiting, right? And adapting your recruitment strategies based on location can be helpful to reps and CYA sponsors. So again, for the sake of this presentation, rural is on reservation, urban is off reservation. Many on reservation schools have youth that are being missed. There's tribal community colleges, powwows, TANF programs, tribal government. Your tribal education department, finding a tribal liaison that's connected to a tribal education department is going to be invaluable to you in reaching tribal youth. So I highly recommend, if there is a tribal education department on reservation for where your location, to speaking to the individuals there. Urban and off reservation, public private high schools, tribal colleges, public colleges. There's a lot of universities now that have tribal programs specifically targeting tribal youth. Community-based organizations that, as we mentioned, are already working with tribal youth. There's tribal centers in a lot of urban areas, and there's tribal TANF programs in urban areas. And again, Native youth conferences. There's a big national Native youth conference called Unity, and it's a leadership conference, and it brings thousands of Native youth from across the US and Alaska into one place at one time. It's a great place to potentially recruit individuals into RAPs, or start the process of sharing the knowledge. Okay, so we want to, when recruiting tribal youth, we need to really focus on strengthening protective factors. So these are things like establishing life goals, family, and family is not always the nuclear family in these communities. Sometimes it's neighbors or friends. Protective factors include, trauma-informed care and social environmental norms, maybe like a sober community. And these are conditions that protect against undesirable outcomes and promote desirable outcomes within an individual's environment. So they matter because they ensure that youth are able to function at home, in school, at work, and in the community. So wrap around. So some examples we have, what are their aspirations? Do they even have aspirations? What is their self-image? What's their cultural connectedness? That's a huge protective factor. Positive opportunities, social norms, and again, as I mentioned, social supports and connectedness like family are all considered protective factors for helping tribal youth move into positive, desirable outcomes like a career pathway. Okay, so engaging respectfully, we're moving on to our second strategy. Remember that the biggest thing is being understanding and consistent. Whatever you are doing, they want to see you are going to consistently be there. So time and consistency is key. We've heard that a couple times now, right? Showing up, just be there. Show up, say hi, bring some food, and be transparent. And be sure to ask questions. Do I sound like a broken record yet? Implicit biases. So when we're engaging, it's important to know where we are coming from. So I've mentioned this a little bit before, but cultural awareness requires honest communication about our knowledge gaps and seeking that clarification from the individual when we need it. You know, it demonstrates humility and authenticity in our desire to engage. We aren't showing up with an agenda or showing up with a certain perspective that is irrelevant to the individual we're working with. So it's better to ask and clarify than assume. But first, we need to know where we land today. So the Harvard Project Implicit website here, let me show you, is a great place to start in learning about our own implicit biases. So these are learned biases that, you know, we may not recognize that we even have. Project Implicit offers a variety of different self-regulated little tests here that you can take to kind of gauge where you're at. And it does kind of, it requires a certain amount of humility and openness to see our own gaps in knowledge and where we have space to improve and to learn so that we can engage with other communities in a respectful, sensitive way and actually see that they have the positive outcomes that we're hoping. So this one here is for Native American, and so it's going to ask you a bunch of different questions here and tie it to positive and negative words that might have a certain connotation. So knowing your own implicit biases is really important to engaging. Okay, real quick before we move on to strategy 3, just a quick check-in. I know it's kind of been a lot. I've just been talking away over here. Lindsay's going to put a poll up for you. This has nothing to do with anything. I just want to make sure you're still alive and you are with me and we are having a darn good time together. So what is your favorite? Rank it. Beach, mountain, desert? What do we got here? Oh, it's some ties. This is great. Uh-oh. Wow. I don't understand why no one likes the desert. What's that about? Looks like we're mountain and beach people. Love it. Mountains is number 1. Okay. I'm an avid hiker, so I'm with you on that one. It's probably a tie between mountains and beach. I'm happy to see everyone's still with us. Okay, strategy number 3. Provide ongoing support. So we've talked about how to recruit tribal youth in a culturally sensitive manner and how to engage with them once we've done some of that recruitment. And those go hand in hand, right? We have to know how to engage with them at the same time that we're on the mission to recruit them into these awesome programs that we have. And now we want to retain them, right? But what do we need to do that? And providing ongoing support is something that programs should consider offering. And as mentioned before, it's not a one size fits all by any means. Everyone is different. Everyone's needs are different. But having a robust program that does address some of the outside external circumstances might set you apart. So ensuring that tribal youth have the social and environmental support that they need to complete their apprenticeship is going to be vital to their success and their performance at work, as well as for your program. And as I mentioned, these supports might be different than for everybody, and it might be different than non-tribal youth. So having those partnerships, like we mentioned before, community partnerships that with organizations that are already serving tribal youth is going to help provide some supports and opportunities when some of these issues come up. And oftentimes tribal youth don't even know that they have a need for something, or they could be embarrassed and just stop coming to the program. So RAPS really has an opportunity to provide services to equip tribal youth with tools to master a variety of circumstances that come up. But it's really important through all of this in retaining youth that the staff that are working in tribal youth understand historical trauma. A quote from one of our interviewees: historical and intergenerational trauma is real. Trauma we have experienced in our life are often barriers to realizing our full potential. Employers should be more educated on this and develop partnerships for access, availability, referral resources that are not under employment support. So staff working directly with tribal youth should definitely be trained and versed in historical and intergenerational trauma, including the signs and symptoms that show up and how to be culturally sensitive. Because the effects of this trauma can really create barriers to success. And this is what we're talking about in terms of building systems within the RAP that could potentially address some of these concerns as they arise. So some ideas are to develop those partnerships with other organizations that might provide mental health services. So really building a strong referral system is going to be really imperative to programs. And learning to recognize these signs of trauma. Now, this is not referring to any type of clinical assessment or necessarily having clinical staff on your team, but being aware of red flags, of body language, of certain words that are used, things that might indicate some kind of trauma happening with the tribal youth, so that the referral to other services can be quick and it can be efficient, and it doesn't impact their progress within the RAP program. So something like connecting them to trained peer support programs is going to be a good idea for many RAPs. Consideration and implementation of additional services that tribal youth might be in need of could be the difference in mitigating tribal youth falling through the cracks, like we mentioned before. They're falling out and we don't necessarily know why, or they don't even know about them. So having some of these support services that are, again, it could be a referral system. Many programs don't have the capacity to have it in-house, which is totally okay, but there are partnerships and ways to work with other programs so that individuals can get the support services that they need. So for example, there might be youth that need childcare. We talked reliable transportation is across the board. It doesn't matter where the individual lives, rural or urban. This is a common concern. As we mentioned already, internet services, and then the equipment, if there are devices, computers, phones that they need, how do they get those devices to complete their program? And we all like to be recognized for our hard work, right? Especially if we've struggled in the past, or we're learning a new skill. RAPS and CYAI has the opportunity to build their capacity to engage in meaningful ways and play a role in empowering tribal youth so that they can advance their futures in this, ever growing and evolving field of cybersecurity. So recognizing and acknowledging successes along the way goes a really long way. And these are going to vary by individual. You might have one person who just needs a pat on the back and a high five just simply for completing registration or the application process. Maybe it's the first time they've ever followed through on something like that. Someone else might need more kudos for passing a first exam or getting their first job offer. So this comes back to the engagement piece and building that relationship with the individual and knowing them and having a way to show their successes back to them along the way. We all like to get a high five, and we all like to be recognized and acknowledged. And I think this is really important for tribal youth in particular to continue and commit fully into a program. So before we get into the Q&A, and one last honor to Native American Heritage Month, I'd like to show a short video of one of my favorite dances. It's the hoop dance. The Goodell family is a multiple generations of world hoop dance champions, and I've had the pleasure to know them over the years. And there's, it's really cool. I think there's a ceremony behind the creation of each hoop, and the designs that are made with each hoop represent an element of Mother Earth. And a lot of the more modern hoop dances mix in some other dance styles, which I think is really cool as well. So please enjoy in honor of Native American Heritage Month. One last video. Thank you so much for your time and attention and your desire to expand your knowledge and humility on this topic. I really appreciate you showing up and being open. At this time, we do have a couple minutes for questions if anyone has any. You could throw them in the chat. Let's see, Kathleen. Can you share some of the examples of youth programs that you have started for tribal youth in cybersecurity that have been able to incorporate many of the elements that you have talked about? for me personally, I have not been a part of starting a program for cybersecurity. So as I mentioned before, these are just general strategies to engage with tribal youth. But that being said, we do have folks on our team who could probably connect you with someone who's used some of these tools to engage with tribal youth in cybersecurity. Thank you for your question. I wish I could say I have like an amazing program that I started myself and one day in cybersecurity. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, well, thank you again so much for your time. I'm gonna hand it back to Lindsay to close out, and then we'll let you carry on with the rest of your day. Thank you again so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was great. I learned a lot personally. And I just want to thank you all again for joining us for today's webinar. The recording of today's webinar will be available sometime in the next month on the CYAI website. And you can find the white paper that Megan mentioned on the website's resource library, the link that I sent earlier, and I will send again in the chat in a moment. And there's other white papers, tip sheets, and other information about CYAI and registered apprenticeships. We will be hosting more webinars in the coming months, so stay tuned for that. And we are doing a bit of a focus on supporting other underserved populations in registered apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeships. So again, we just want to thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Megan for all the wonderful information that you shared. And I sent the email for our team, CYAI 2024 at icf.com, and you can contact us with more questions that you have. And if you have any questions about CYAI as well. So we look forward to seeing you at future webinars, and I hope you have a great rest of your day today. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.